As the sun broke on July 10, 1943, the formidable Operation Husky, a crucial Allied invasion of Sicily, was set into motion. The United States, alongside their British counterparts, sought to capture this key Mediterranean island from the Axis powers, hoping it would open new fronts against Nazi-occupied Europe and ease pressure on the Eastern Front. The Allied forces, under the overall command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, with operational command divided between General Bernard Montgomery, leading the British 8th Army, and Lieutenant General George S. Patton, in charge of the American 7th Army, expected a swift victory. The terrain of Sicily, however, presented unexpected challenges. The island's rocky, arid landscape, interspersed with abrupt ridges and harsh hills, transformed each military maneuver into a grueling test of endurance and strategy. Furthermore, the Axis forces, comprising the Italian 6th Army and elements of the German Wehrmacht, skillfully fortified key positions, making every hill a veritable fortress. Their defensive placements significantly outnumbered the assumed strength, as intelligence underestimations failed to account adequately for the strategic prowess and resilience of the German forces bolstering the Italian defenders. Strategically, the Allied forces had opted for a direct amphibious assault. This was undertaken primarily by American forces on the southern beaches near Gela, and the British forces eastward near Syracuse. The Gela landing was particularly vital as it aimed to secure the Vizzini Range and provide a pathway towards the interior. However, the beach landings immediately met with robust resistance. German and Italian troops utilized the inherent advantages of high ground, employing long-range artillery which had been pre-sighted to deter any advancing foe. The mastery of combined arms combat shown by the Axis powers, including strategic use of both conventional and mobile artillery, along with rapid deployment of armored counters via Tiger and Panther tanks, threw the American troops into dire situations repeatedly during the initial stages of the invasion. The Americans had planned extensive use of armor and motorized infantry in conjunction with air support to break through these defenses. However, the effectiveness of such plans was initially mitigated by the rough-and-tumble nature of the Sicilian landscape, which rendered swift armored maneuvers nearly impossible. The narrow, unpaved roads twisted through the hills, often becoming choke points under intense Axis shelling. Additionally, the initial air supremacy hoped for by the Allies was challenged by the unexpected persistence of the Luftwaffe, which managed several effective sorties against Allied beachheads in the early days of the invasion. Human impact dialed significantly as the battlefronts curved through every village and hill. The Sicilian populace, already harried by the years of war and fascist regime control, found themselves caught in the crossfire. While some Sicilians saw the Allies as liberators, others were fiercely loyal to the Mussolini regime, leading to mixed receptions for the advancing troops. Furthermore, the necessity of engaging enemies so close to civilian structures led to unfortunate but inevitable collateral damage, which not only caused civilian casualties but also complicated the logistics of maintaining momentum in public support for the Allied operations. Logistically, the terrain and resistance forced an evolution in Allied tactics. The idea of swift armored thrusts across the island had to be recalibrated into methodical infantry-led assaults, supported by concentrated artillery barrages and close air support. The adaptation involved meticulously clearing Axis strong points through combined arms synergy, where tanks, infantry, and engineers worked collectively under the protective umbrella of relentless artillery and air cover. This meticulous approach slowed the Allied advance but reduced the otherwise extensive casualties while dislodging entrenched Axis units effectively. One of the pivotal engagements in this phase was the Battle of Troina, which took place in early August. The town of Troina, positioned on a high ridge, provided the Axis forces a natural bastion, commanding the surrounding routes and making it a linchpin in the defense network. The U.S. 9th Infantry Division, supported by elements of the 1st Armored Division, faced a relentless and disciplined opponent. The Germans, equipped with superior high-altitude weaponry and reinforced by elite paratroopers, presented a formidable challenge. The battle raged for days, often descending into brutal hand-to-hand combat, as American troops tried to dislodge defenders from their entrenched positions. The eventual capture of Troina by Allied forces marked a turning point, representing not just a tactical win, but a significant morale booster for the troops. In this fierce and protracted campaign, the Allies learned valuable lessons in warfare that would be carried into subsequent operations in mainland Italy and beyond. Patton's ability to adapt his strategies in response to ground realities, the British and American forces' increasing coordination, and the burgeoning proficiency in combined arms combat were developments forged in the fires of Sicily. As Sicily fell on August 17th, marking the first piece of Axis-held territory to be captured by the Allies, the victory was as much a triumph of endurance and adaptation as it was of military might. The Sicilian campaign underscored the harsh realities of warfare, where not just the physical, but the moral fiber of the forces is tested, shaping the Allied approach to the later stages of the war, where strategy, patience, and recognition of human elements became as crucial as firepower and numbers. Following the victory in Sicily, American and Allied forces faced the daunting challenge of transitioning their strategic focus to the Italian mainland, a campaign anticipated to be as bitter and grueling as any encountered thus far. The decision to invade Italy was influenced significantly by the desire to knock Italy out of the war, to divert German divisions from the eastern and western fronts, and to establish airfields within range of German and Balkan targets. This strategic shift was not merely a continuation of prior military efforts, but a complex logistical enterprise involving massive troop movements, intricate supply chains, and the reconfiguration of naval and air support. The amphibious landed at Salerno on September 3, 1943, symbolized a new phase of the conflict. Here, the forces met stiff resistance from well-prepared German troops who had taken over defensive duties from their Italian counterparts. The Germans, led by Field Marshal Kesselring, implemented a defense-in-depth strategy that utilized the rugged terrain to their advantage, creating fortified positions that turned every advance into a costly venture for the Allies. The terrain of Italy, with its jagged mountains and narrow valleys, provided numerous natural obstacles that were augmented by German ingenuity and fortifications. They constructed complex networks of machine gun nests, anti-tank ditches, and reinforced concrete pillboxes, a stark contrast to the relatively mobile warfare witnessed in Sicily. As the Allied troops pushed forward from Salerno towards Naples, the logistic considerations became increasingly complex. The necessity of maintaining a steady supply line over a precarious beachhead in the face of relentless German counterattacks highlighted the importance of logistic units. These units, often unsung heroes of military campaigns, ensured the continuous flow of ammunition, food, medical supplies, and reinforcement troops. This logistic challenge was compounded by the Italian infrastructure, which was either inadequate or had been sabotaged by retreating German forces. Bridging equipment, portable piers, and engineering units became as integral to the Allied advance as the infantry, tanks, and artillery units. The human cost of these advances began to mount as the campaign wore on. Tales of valor and tragedy emerged from the front lines. Medics and corpsmen were on constant call, tending to the wounded under fire, exemplifying the human spirit's resilience. The psychological toll on the soldiers was immense, living under constant threat of artillery fire, seeing comrades fall in battle, and the relentless push against a tenacious and unseen enemy wore down even the sturdiest of men. Stories such as that of Private John Ryan, who single-handedly saved his platoon by neutralizing an enemy machine gun nest, remind us of the personal acts of bravery that punctuated the brutal campaign. The Battle of Monte Cassino further exemplified the collision of strategy, human endeavor, and the cruelty of war. This series of 4 battles, taking place between January and May 1944 around a historic hilltop abbey, became emblematic of the Italian campaign's challenges. The Allies, convinced that the Germans were using the abbey as a defensive stronghold, bombed it to ruins. This decision, however, proved to be controversial, as it provided the German paratroopers with rubble, making ideal defensive fortifications that prolonged the battle and increased casualties. The destruction of the historically significant abbey also sparked an international uproar, highlighting the moral and cultural dilemmas faced in wartime. The strategic bombing of railways, bridges, and factories, vital components of the Allied air campaign aimed at crippling German logistical and industrial capabilities in Italy, had mixed results. While it undoubtedly hampered German movements and supplies, it also caused significant civilian casualties and displacement, contributing to the war's polarized views. The balance between military objectives and humanitarian concerns continued to be a contentious issue, debated among commanders, and chronicled by war correspondents who played a crucial role in shaping public perception of the war. Logistically, the Mediterranean's control played a crucial role in the overall Allied strategy. The daunting task of maintaining and securing supply lines across thousands of miles of ocean was fraught with danger from U-boat attacks and aerial assaults. The naval engagements, often overlooked in favor of ground and air operations, were crucial in ensuring that the supplies, troops, and equipment reached the front line. This naval aspect of the campaign underscored the multidimensional nature of modern warfare, where control of the sea could be as decisive as control of the land. As the Allied forces made their final push towards Rome, the liberation of the Italian capital in June 1944 represented not just a strategic victory, but also a significant symbolic conquest, boosting Allied morale and dealing a psychological blow to the Axis powers. The fall of Rome also marked a turning point in how the world viewed the inevitability of Axis defeat, contributing to the crumbling of Italian and German morale. This segment of the Second World War, characterized by a series of prolonged, grueling campaigns and a complex interplay of military, logistical, and human factors, highlights the multifaceted nature of global conflict. It underscores not only the strategic and tactical genius required to undertake such operations, but also the enduring spirit of the individuals who lived, fought, and perished in these battles. If the courage and tenacity witnessed throughout these vivid chapters of history intrigue you, consider subscribing for more insightful explorations and share your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons can we take from these grueling campaigns, and how might they inform our understanding of modern military strategies and human resilience? The launching of the Allied campaign into Sicily in early July 1943, famously known as Operation Husky, marked a crucial phase in the Mediterranean theater of World War II. This amphibious and airborne operation, vital for gaining a foothold in the enemy-occupied Europe, aimed to secure a swift and decisive victory to expel Axis powers from the island, paving the career way to the Italian mainland. However, the Allies soon encountered unexpectedly fierce resistance that tested every facet of their military prowess and logistical capabilities. The initial landings on the southern shores of Sicily were crafted with a complex blend of naval, air, and ground forces, wherein more than 160,000 Allied troops were deployed across the beaches in a meticulously coordinated invasion that was the largest of its type up to that point in the war. The amphibious landings were supported by airborne drops aimed at disrupting enemy communications and seizing key positions. Yet, despite the Allies' advantage in numbers and equipment, the steep and rugged terrain of Sicily provided German and Italian defenders with ample natural fortifications, turning what was expected to be a rapid advance into a slow, grinding slog. One of the most jarring elements of the campaign was the unexpected level of resistance offered by the Axis forces. Hilltops, small towns, and vital crossroads became bastions of fierce combat. Axis commanders utilized the natural topography of Sicily to their advantage, creating formidable defense lines that were deeply entrenched and heavily fortified. For example, the Battle of Centuripe was emblematic of the detailed and prepared defense tactics employed by the Axis. Nestled on a high ridge, Centuripe was fortified with gun positions and protected by steep cliffs, making any approach risky and direct assault nearly suicidal. Allied troops, mainly consisting of British and Canadian forces, engaged in a painstaking strategy of encirclement and direct confrontation, often under the blistering Sicilian sun and against a relentless enemy. The Allied forces, under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, with seasoned commanders like General Bernard Montgomery and General George S. Patton, had to frequently adapt their tactics and strategies. Inter-Allied disagreements and miscommunications further complicated the operational efficiency. For example, Patton's rush towards Palermo was partly influenced by his notorious rivalry with Montgomery, impacting the overall cohesion and timing of the operations. The logistical strain placed on the Allies was tremendous, with the need to secure continuous supply lines across the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean, under constant threat from Axis air and naval attacks. One cannot underscore enough the human cost that characterized this gritty phase of the war. The medical and infrastructural logistics were stretched to their limits, as hospitals and makeshift medical stations were overwhelmed by the influx of casualties. The Sicilian campaign was also a sobering experience for the civilians on the island, whose homes and villages became unexpected war zones. Stories of displacement, loss, and the struggle to maintain daily life amid chaos add a poignant layer to the narrative of the campaign. The strained relations between Allied forces and Sicilian civilians occasionally brewed tension, complicating the liberation narrative and adding to the socio-political dynamics at play. Moreover, the air and naval supremacy assumed by the Allies played critical roles throughout the campaign. The relentless Allied air bombings on Axis airfields and transportation networks significantly disrupted the resupply and reinforcement capabilities of the Axis forces. Simultaneously, the Allied naval blockade effectively isolated the island, but not without cost. The Axis managed several damaging strikes, including the notable bombing raid in Syracuse, where the Luftwaffe surprised Allied ships with a night attack, resulting in significant Allied casualties and material losses. The culmination of these prolonged encounters led to a bitter, costly victory, as Axis forces conducted a strategic withdrawal to the Italian mainland. The fall of Sicily in August 1943, completed in just over 5 weeks, was significant not merely as a military victory, but as a catalyst for political upheaval within Italy, leading to the toppling of Mussolini and Italy's subsequent armistice with the Allies. This outcome, however, came at a dear cost, highlighting the brutal reality of warfare where strategic objectives are often achingly secured with extensive human and material sacrifices. In retrospect, the campaign in Sicily is a vivid account of the complexities and brutalities of war. It challenged the previous notions of swift Allied victories anticipated based on North African campaigns. Instead, the Sicilian operation underscored the adaptability and resilience required by the Allied forces to combat not just the Axis military might, but also the challenging landscapes and multifaceted logistical hurdles. The lessons learned from this arduous campaign informed subsequent Allied operations in Italy and beyond, particularly in terms of inter-Allied cooperation and the integration of combined arms tactics. As the narrative of the Sicilian campaign is dissected, it unravels the intertwining strands of tactical innovation, human endurance, and the continuous dance of strategic foresight against unforeseen battlefield realities. Each reclaimed hill and secured town during the campaign encapsulates stories not just of military triumph, but also of personal sacrifice, strategic ingenuity, and a relentless pursuit of a broader geopolitical vision, intricately weaving together the overarching narrative of the Second World War. As the Allied forces pressed onward from the coastal beaches into the rugged interiors of Sicily, their initial expectations of a quick campaign were met with unforeseen resistance and tactical difficulties. Each mile gained was a story of extraordinary effort, logistical improvisation, and strategic reevaluation. The heartland's synclinal valleys and precipitous hills transformed into contested battlegrounds, where Axis forces exploited the topography to their tactical advantage, employing defensive strategies that stymied the Allied advance. American and British commanders, facing stiffened resistance, soon realized that each hill, each small village was intricately fortified, turning these into bastions of Axis defense. The Germans, along with Italian forces loyal to Mussolini, constructed deep trenches, placed sniper nests thoughtfully to cover all approaches, and laid extensive minefields. Hidden artillery positions on higher ground acted as the linchpins in this network of entrenched resistance. This strategic placement not only delayed the Allied advance significantly, but also inflicted heavy casualties, complicating operational logistics and dampening the morale of the Allied troops. The challenges were not merely tactical but also logistical. Sicily's roads, narrow and serpentine, were barely capable of supporting the mass movement of troops and the heavy machinery requisite for a modern army. The Allies' supply lines were often stretched thin, vulnerable to Axis airstrikes and guerrilla tactics by Axis partisan units. The logistics teams worked frenetically to ensure a steady stream of supplies, often resorting to airdrops and makeshift solutions to keep the frontline forces supplied with ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Fuel, the lifeblood of the armored divisions and transport vehicles, became a resource as precious as any strategic foothold. The human dimension of the Sicilian campaign added a layer of complexity to the unfolding narrative. Soldiers, removed from the numbing desert warfares of North Africa, found themselves embroiled in a terrain that was both physically daunting and mentally taxing. The broiling sun, the rugged cliffs, and the persistent presence of death sculpted a scenario in which resilience was born of necessity. Among these men, stories of heroism emerged, like that of Sergeant John O'Malley, who during the arduous ascent on Monte Loro led a charge against a well-entrenched machine gun nest, outflanking it and capturing it with his small squad. Such tales became the fabric of the moral compass driving the Allied troops forward. Command and control, too, were subjected to the trial by fire. Allied leaders, including Generals Patton and Montgomery, found their preconceived tactics often unsuited to the mercurial nature of the Sicilian resistance. The initially planned rapid thrusts across the island were recalibrated into incremental, well-coordinated pushes that allowed for air support and artillery bombardments to soften the entrenched Axis positions before infantry moved in. This reshaping of battlefield strategy was emblematic of the dynamic thinking necessitated by the harsh Sicilian terrain and the formidable Axis defenses. Moreover, the Allied forces had to grapple with the psychological warfare and civil interactions that complicated their operational environment. In liberated towns, the reaction of the local populace ranged from ecstatic relief to cautious hostility, reflecting the tangled web of fascist indoctrination, fear of retaliation, and genuine relief at liberation. These civilians, caught in the throes of war, often emerged as key figures in the logistical network of the Allies, providing critical intelligence and logistical support, but also presenting a moral challenge to the occupying forces, who had to balance military expediency with humane treatment of non-combatants. As summer wore on, the grinding campaign tested the limits of the Allied strategic paradigm, challenging the commanders to innovate in the heat of battle. The use of naval gunfire to disrupt Axis artillery emplacements, the integration of paratroopers behind enemy lines to cut off retreats and supply lines, and the increasing reliance on signals intelligence to predict enemy movements were all testament to a learning curve that, while steep, inevitably positioned the Allied forces towards eventual victory. The fall of the strategic town of Messina in August marked the culmination of the Allied efforts in Sicily. The Axis forces, though vastly outgunned and facing inevitable defeat, orchestrated a tactical withdrawal across the Strait of Messina to the Italian mainland, preserving much of their combat strength for future engagements. This maneuver, executed under the cover of night, and despite air and naval interdiction by Allied forces, demonstrated the enduring tenacity of the Axis military doctrine, and foreshadowed the prolonged and arduous campaign that would unfold on the Italian peninsula. In hindsight, the campaign in Sicily stands not only as a military endeavor characterized by bloodshed and strategic maneuverings, but also as a significant chapter in the psychological and moral transformation within the Allied expeditionary forces. The lessons derived from Sicily, ranging from tactical ingenuity to logistical improvisations, from command adaptations to the handling of civil affairs, laid the groundwork for the subsequent Italian campaign. This operation had made clear that the road to Berlin would be forged through not only firepower and strategy, but also through perseverance, adaptation, and an unwavering commitment to the principles for which the war was being fought. Thus, as the documentary narrative unfolds, the Sicilian campaign is portrayed as more than a mere military operation. It is a complex story of human struggle, strategic innovation, and the tortuous path toward victory in the crucible of war. Each step forward by the Allied forces on the island was a testament to the multifaceted nature of warfare, where each hill turned into a fortress of fire, each strategic victory a step closer to the eventual downfall of fascist tyranny in Europe. Through meticulously documented events and poignant human stories, the campaign illustrates the enduring truth that in the fog of war, victories are often chiseled not just with weapons, but with the indomitable human spirit persevering against all odds. As the American forces landed on the shores of Sicily, the expectation was one of swift victory. Intelligence reports had led the Allied commanders to believe that the Axis powers, exhausted and spread thin, would offer little resistance. Yet the reality on the ground was starkly different. Sicily, rich in history and strategic value, was not going to be relinquished without a fierce struggle. Each geographical advantage the island offered was converted into a bastion of Axis defiance. Every hill and valley turned into a lethal trap for the advancing Allies. It was here that the tactical, logistical, and human dimensions of warfare intertwined in one of World War II's most grueling campaigns. The initial phase of the operation saw a combined assault by airborne forces and amphibious landings. Over 150,000 troops from the United States, British and Canadian forces, along with divisions from Australia and Free French soldiers, made landfall on the night of July 9, 1943. The intent was clear and strategic: secure airfields and establish a strong foothold from which the island could be wrested piece by piece from Axis control. Paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne were dropped behind enemy lines, with the aim of disrupting communications and sowing disarray. However, misdrops and strong winds scattered many units across the rugged terrains of Sicily, complicating the initial objectives and foreshadowing the communication and coordination challenges that would pervade the campaign. Simultaneously, naval shelling from Allied ships sought to weaken Axis strongholds along the coast. But German and Italian defenses were robust, featuring a comprehensive network of bunkers, artillery positions, and machine gun nests expertly integrated into Sicily's hilly landscape. Axis commanders, well aware of the strategic value of their position, had fortified every potential landing zone with a deep understanding of its defensive capabilities. The tactics were clear: bleed the Allies white at the beaches, counterattack aggressively, and never give a respite or a foothold easily. As U.S. General George S. Patton and British General Bernard Montgomery pushed their forces inland, they encountered grueling resistance. The Battle of Piazza Ridge was emblematic of the challenges faced. American troops of the 1st and 45th Infantry Divisions found themselves embroiled in a brutal fight for control of a nondescript piece of high ground that offered commanding views of the surrounding valleys. Here, the Americans encountered the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, a battle-hardened unit that utilized the terrain efficiently, pre-sighted artillery, and coordinated counterstrikes with precision. Despite the Allied superiority in numbers and equipment, the Axis forces displayed a nuanced understanding of defensive warfare, turning each advance into a costly endeavor in terms of human lives and material. As the campaign dragged on, logistical strains began to tell heavily on the Allied operations. Maintaining a steady flow of reinforcements and supplies across the Sicilian Straits was a logistical nightmare. The harrowing experience at the ports of Syracuse and Gela illustrated the vulnerability of supply lines to air attacks and sabotage. Additionally, the rugged and mountainous Sicilian interior tested the limits of the Allied mechanized and motorized units, which were hampered by the narrow, winding roads and the constant need for fuel and repairs. The human cost of the campaign began to weigh heavily on the minds of the commanders and the soldiers alike. Allied casualty rates climbed as the fighting intensified in towns like Caltagirone, Troina, and Randazzo. Civilians, caught in the crossfire, suffered immense hardships. The disruption of local agriculture and infrastructure due to continuous fighting led to shortages of food, water, and medical supplies, exacerbating the toll on the civilian population and adding a layer of complexity to the Allied military governance. After weeks of relentless fighting, the fall of Messina on August 17, 1943, marked the end of the Sicilian campaign. The city's capture came too late to prevent the evacuation of substantial Axis forces, who managed to retreat across the Strait of Messina to regroup on the Italian mainland. The strategic implications of this were significant. While Sicily had been wrested from Axis control, the ability of German and Italian forces to conduct an orderly withdrawal allowed them to conserve their strength for the arduous battles that lay ahead on the Italian peninsula. The Sicilian campaign exposed several critical lessons that were to resonate throughout the rest of the Allied operations in Europe. Command and control needed to be tighter, as evidenced by the challenges faced due to scattered airborne landings and poor communication. Logistical planning needed to account more thoroughly for terrain and enemy countermoves. Tactical flexibility and the ability to adapt to the fluid dynamics of a battlefield were identified as key areas for improvement. In analyzing the Sicilian campaign, it becomes evident that warfare is not merely a test of strength, but rather a complex interaction of strategy, psychology, and logistics. Every soldier's experience, every general's decision, and every local interaction added layers to the narrative of the campaign, painting a detailed picture of the war that was as much about human spirit and resilience as it was about military might. As we continue to explore these pivotal moments in history, we invite you to subscribe and join us on this journey through the annals of war. Your suggestions for topics or events you would like us to cover in future documentaries are invaluable as we strive to bring you insights and reflections from one of human history's most significant periods. As American forces landed on the shores of Sicily in July of 1943, under the codename Operation Husky, they anticipated a swift victory. The Axis powers, however, proved resilient, transforming every hill and village into a veritable fortress. The offensive marked the first major role of American military might in the European theater, and would test both the tactical acumen and the logistical capabilities of the Allies. Comprising both American and British Commonwealth forces under the unified command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the operation included a formidable array of air support and naval gunfire. Nonetheless, the reality of the terrain and the staunch defense mounted by the Axis introduced unexpected complications that would define the grueling campaign. The geography of Sicily, with its rugged hills and limited roads, offered natural strongholds to Italian and German defensive units. The Axis capitalized on this, integrating anti-tank guns and artillery into high-ground positions, effectively commanding the main advance routes and causing significant Allied casualties. This integration of geography and firepower required the Allies to adjust their tactics continually. Initial heavy reliance on paratroopers to secure key positions ahead of the main landing forces faced unforeseen challenges. Many paratroopers landed off target, disorganized and unable to achieve their objectives promptly, leaving the main invasion beaches vulnerable to counterattack. The Allies learned harsh lessons about air-ground coordination, which, although meticulously planned, failed to account for the practical difficulties of nighttime operations and unpredictable winds. Moreover, the Axis forces, led by experienced commanders such as General Albert Kesselring and General Hans Valentin Hube, used delaying tactics skillfully. They implemented a dynamic defense, retreating to pre-prepared positions while maintaining pressure on advancing Allied forces. This not only slowed the Allied push but also inflicted heavy wear on Allied troops and equipment. The utilization of the Nebelwerfer, a multi-barreled rocket launcher by German forces, brought further terror and confusion to the Allied ranks. Its distinctive wailing noise earned it the nickname "Screaming Mimi," and its psychological impact on troops was profound. The Allies' response was to adjust their logistical strategy significantly. Recognizing the need to supply their advancing forces efficiently while under constant threat, They improved their coordination of naval and ground forces. Naval gunfire was increasingly used not merely to soften defenses ahead of an advance, but dynamically, in response to evolving battlefield conditions. This real-time support helped to neutralize some of the well-entrenched Axis artillery, allowing Allied ground forces to make incremental, albeit costly, progress. This tactical evolution, however, came with its cost. The intense and prolonged battles led to high casualty rates, which placed additional stress on Allied medical services. Field hospitals were quickly overwhelmed, and the logistics of medical evacuation back across the turbulent Mediterranean were daunting. Moreover, the civilian population of Sicily suffered immensely. The Allies, while trying to liberate the island, also needed to manage large populations of displaced civilians who were frequently caught in the crossfire. The requirement to govern and provide for civilians further stretched Allied resources, complicating their tactical and operational plans. The strategic port town of Palermo, essential for its harbors, which could facilitate a massive inflow of men and materiel, became a focal point of the campaign. Capture of Palermo was deemed essential for a sustained push towards Messina, the crucial crossing point to the Italian mainland. As the Allies inched forward, the deteriorating Axis situation led to a change in command with the appointment of General Guzzoni, who intensified the Axis defensive strategy. The vigorous defense of Palermo exemplified the Axis resolve. Despite suffering from dwindling resources and air superiority by the Allies, they held firm until the Allies encircled and captured the city in late July. The final stages toward Messina were marked by a series of attritional battles through heavily defended towns and difficult terrain. The roads to Messina were flanked by mountains, and every pass was heavily fortified. Axis forces used the natural choke points to their advantage, setting up defensive lines that maximized the delaying strategy. It was a demonstration of both tactical awareness by the Axis and a testing ground for Allied joint operations, involving coordination between ground troops and naval and air gunships, which by now had become more synchronized. The campaign's culmination at Messina demonstrated a crucial tactical takeaway for the Allies: the importance of integrated forces. While the Allies had superior numbers and material, the Axis forces had effectively used the terrain and fortifications to offset these advantages. The delay allowed many Axis units to evacuate to Italy, where they would stand against the Allies once again, this time on the Italian mainland. Reflecting on the Sicilian campaign, it becomes evident that the Allied forces, though ultimately victorious, paid heavily in terms of lives, resources, and time. The campaign also set the stage for the Italian campaign, which would prove even more arduous. The lessons in command control, logistical flexibility, and adaptability in battle tactics during Operation Husky were hard-learned but crucial. They forged a path toward a more refined strategic approach, as the Allies continued their push against the Axis powers in Europe. In sum, the Sicilian campaign, with its harsh terrain, staunch defense, and logistical nightmares, distills the complexity of modern warfare. It underscores the inexorable intertwining of tactical decisions, strategic planning, human valor, and suffering. The conquest of Sicily was not merely a military victory, but a profound lesson in the dynamics of war, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a tragic chapter in the annals of the 20th century warfare. As we delve deeper into these historical moments, they reveal not only the strategic dimensions, but also the profound human costs embedded in the fabric of warfare. In the context of the Sicilian campaign, the Allied forces confronted a myriad of strategic and tactical challenges that tested both their resolve and their military ingenuity. As American, British, and Canadian troops landed on the shores of Sicily in July 1943, codenamed Operation Husky, they anticipated a swift victory. However, they quickly realized that each hill, each village was a fortress, heavily defended by a resolute Axis force comprising Germans and Italians who skillfully used the rugged terrain to their advantage. The operation, involving more than 160,000 Allied troops and 600 ships, represented one of the largest amphibious military assaults at the time. The strategic objective was clear: to secure Sicily as a stepping stone for the invasion of Italian mainland, and to knock Italy out of the war, thereby weakening the Axis powers. However, the tactical executions required to achieve this goal were fraught with difficulties. The initial landings, while successful in achieving surprise, soon encountered German and Italian troops entrenched in well-fortified positions. The Axis forces had constructed a network of bunkers and gun emplacements, exploiting the natural features of the landscape, such as high mounts and steep valleys, which allowed them to dominate several key approaches to the island. The Allied forces also faced logistical nightmares. The terrain of Sicily, with its narrow, winding roads and limited number of ports, presented significant challenges to the movement and resupply of troops. The sheer logistical effort to maintain a steady flow of reinforcements and supplies was a monumental task coordinated across a complex network, involving not just the forces on the ground, but also naval and air units. This operation tested the limits of Allied logistics, from the handling of thousands of tons of equipment to managing the disparate needs of their ground forces under the harsh Mediterranean summer. As the campaign unfolded, the Allies made heavy use of artillery and air bombardments to try and dislodge the Axis forces from their fortified positions. The Allies' air superiority, a crucial component in their tactical planning, allowed them to perform relentless airstrikes on Axis strongholds and convoys. However, the Axis anti-aircraft defenses were robust and posed a significant challenge to Allied aircraft, leading to substantial losses. On the ground, the infantry found themselves in grueling confrontations, often engaging in hand-to-hand combat as they attempted to take strategic positions. The fighting was fierce, and casualty rates climbed as each side fought desperately to maintain or wrest control. Among the pivotal battles was the struggle for Monte Cassino, a historic monastery that had been converted into a German stronghold. This battle exemplified the brutal nature of the campaign and the severe conditions under which the soldiers fought. The decision to finally bomb the monastery, after much agonizing over the potential loss of a historic site, highlighted the harsh choices military commanders had to make in the heat of battle. The bombing, however, did not achieve the desired tactical advantage, and the ruins of the monastery provided even more formidable cover for the German defenders, prolonging the battle and increasing the casualties. The Allied commanders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, and General George S. Patton, had to continuously adapt their strategies and tactics in response to the evolving situation on the ground. This campaign was a testing ground for joint operations, and it highlighted the need for coordination among the Allied forces, which came from different backgrounds and had different military doctrines. The tension between Patton and Montgomery, both ambitious and determined commanders, also reflected broader challenges in coalition warfare, where differing national strategies and egos had to be managed. Despite the fierce resistance, the operational integration of air, sea, and land forces gradually tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. The capture of Palermo, the Sicilian capital, marked a significant turn in the campaign, boosting the morale of Allied forces and putting greater pressure on Axis powers. The subsequent fall of Messina, despite the successful evacuation of many Axis troops to the Italian mainland, marked the completion of the Allied objective in Sicily. The Sicilian campaign, while a military success and fulfilling its strategic objectives, came at a high human cost. Thousands of soldiers on both sides lost their lives, and the civilian casualties added to the tragedy of the campaign. The destruction wrought on Sicily itself was also profound, with many towns and villages damaged or destroyed, highlighting the harsh realities of war where civilian populations often bear a significant brunt of the conflict. The lessons learned in Sicily were manifold. They included the realization of the importance of intelligence in amphibious operations, the vital role of air superiority, the necessity for effective logistical planning, and the complexities of coalition warfare. These lessons would be carried into subsequent Allied operations, including the invasion of mainland Italy and the Normandy landings in France on D-Day, where they shaped the Allies' approach in those pivotal moments of the war. As historians reflect on the Sicilian campaign, it remains a powerful reminder of the complexity and brutality of war. It underscores the challenges of military strategy and tactics in the face of determined resistance and difficult terrain, the significance of logistical operations in modern warfare, and the profound human and moral costs that are an inescapable part of such conflicts. The legacy of Sicily is not just one of strategic success, but also a somber testament to the resilience and sacrifice required to achieve that success. Block 08. Following the Axis retreat from Sicily and the eventual capture of the strategic town of Messina, the Allies had accomplished an important but costly victory. The Allied forces now faced the daunting task of preparing for the invasion of the Italian mainland, an operation that would require a profound re-evaluation of their previous experiences and tactics learned during the Sicilian campaign. The terrain of mainland Italy, with its rugged mountains and narrow valleys, presented formidable natural defenses that the German Wehrmacht and Italian troops could potentially exploit. The success in Sicily had different lessons on coordination between the land, air, and naval forces that came under the banner of the Allies, the United States, Britain, and Canada among others, but had, more significantly, highlighted challenges that required deep introspection and tactical overhaul. Military tacticians found themselves dissecting each phase of the Sicilian operation, taking special note of the challenges surrounding the integration of multinational forces under common goals but differing protocols and command structures. The tension between British General Bernard Montgomery and American General George S. Patton during the campaign exemplified the difficulties in coalition command, which, if not addressed, could undermine the effectiveness of future operations. These interpersonal dynamics, coupled with logistical challenges like those faced during the rapid advance to Messina, needed careful management. The issues of supply chain coordination, effective communication systems, and unified command structures stood out as critical areas for improvement. In anticipation of the mainland invasion, Allied commanders paid increasing attention to improving joint operational techniques, highlighting the need for a coordinated approach in both tactical offensives and in setting up defensive positions. Artillery placement, air support synchronization, and armored division maneuvers were areas of focus. Special emphasis was put on engineering brigades, whose tasks included the rapid construction and repair of roads and bridges, critical for the mobility of the Allied forces. The terrain of Italy, much like the rugged Sicilian landscape, was anticipated to be a hurdle in the rapid advance of armored units and infantry. The development of specific battle drills aimed at rapid river crossings and mountain warfare became a focal point in the training regimen of the troops. Moreover, the lessons from airborne operations in Sicily, which saw significant misdrops and resulted in scattered paratroopers, led to a re-evaluation of paratroop deployment strategies. The need for precise intelligence and the implementation of improved navigation tools became apparent. The introduction of pathfinders, elite paratroopers sent ahead to mark drop zones, began to be seriously considered to enhance the effectiveness of airborne assaults. The human costs of the campaign were profound and had a significant impact on the strategic thinking of Allied leaders. The Sicilian campaign had shown the stark reality of civilian casualties, which not only caused a humanitarian concern, but also impacted military operations and troop morale. The destruction of towns and the displacement of civilians created logistical nightmares, complicating the supply chain and stretching medical services thin. This had a psychological effect on the soldiers, who were not only fighting the enemy but also witnessing the suffering of innocent bystanders. The command structure began to integrate psychological support services and placed a greater emphasis on minimizing civilian casualties, recognizing that the fight was not just for territory, but also for the hearts and minds of the people. Such introspection led to more holistic approaches in subsequent operations, with better defined rules of engagement designed to protect civilian lives. The intelligence apparatus worked more closely with resistance movements within Italy, gathering crucial insights into enemy positions and local terrain. The support from local partisans was recognized as a valuable asset, and their role in the resistance against Axis forces began to be seen as a pivotal element of the broader strategic picture. As preparations for the invasion of mainland Italy moved forward, The Allied forces had to contend with another major issue: the unpredictable political situation in Italy. The fall of Mussolini in July 1943 had opened a potential avenue for an armistice between Italy and the Allied forces, which would require delicate diplomatic maneuvers alongside ongoing military operations. This politically charged atmosphere added a layer of complexity to the operational planning, as negotiations and battle plans had to be aligned closely to react to rapidly changing situations. The Allied leadership found themselves balancing military aggression with diplomatic sensitivity, aiming to pry Italy away from the Axis bloc while preparing to face the hardened German defenses that awaited them across the landscape. In conclusion, the transition from the Sicilian campaign to preparations for the invasion of mainland Italy encapsulated a period of intense military, logistical, and emotional challenges. The Allied commanders had to synthesize the harsh lessons of Sicily with the anticipation of even tougher resistance ahead. Each step, from restructured command systems and refined battle tactics to the integration of psychological and civilian considerations, reflected a maturation in Allied strategic outlook. The war was evolving into not just a series of battlefield engagements, but a complex tapestry of conflict and cooperation, influencing and being influenced by the wider geopolitical shifts and the powerful human stories that emerged from within the fog of war. This phase of World War II, rich in tactical innovations and poignant human experiences, continued to underline the immense complexity of global conflict, where every victory and setback fed back into the ever-adaptive strategies of those locked in battle. Such campaigns not only shaped the course of the war, but also left lasting legacies on military tactics and international relations, legacies that continue to be studied and appreciated in the context of global military history. As American and British forces landed in Sicily in July of 1943 under the codename Operation Husky, commanding officers were initially optimistic, anticipating a rapid advance through the Italian island. However, the actual battle unfolding on Sicilian soil was dramatically different from their preliminary calculations. Instead of an anticipated swiftly yielding enemy, they encountered a rugged terrain transformed into heavily fortified zones, where every hill and village became a bastion of Axis resistance. The Allied forces, despite their superior numbers and equipment, found themselves mired in a brutal and slow progression that tested every facet of their military acumen. The defending German and Italian troops, led by experienced officers, took full advantage of Sicily's mountainous landscape. They established strong defensive positions at key choke points, employing a tactic known as defense in depth. This method systematically utilized multiple lines of defense, allowing some units to engage the enemy while others repositioned to continue the resistance from further back, a structure designed to exhaust the attackers and sap their momentum. The German 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, along with units of the Italian 6th Army, leveraged well-concealed artillery positions, minefields, and natural obstacles such as the rugged hills and densely vegetated terrains to deadly effect. These factors, combined with the intense summer heat and scarceness of water, eroded the advance and stamina of the Allied soldiers, turning the campaign into a grueling slog rather than the swift victory that had been anticipated. Beyond the physical and strategic barriers, logistical complexities posed significant challenges. The Allies faced severe difficulties in supply chain management. The rocky terrain impeded the construction of temporary airstrips and hampered the movement of trucks and tanks, crucial for bringing forward supplies of ammunition, food, and medical equipment. This logistical nightmare was compounded by the effective Axis aerial and naval harassment of supply routes in the Mediterranean, which forced the Allies to invest heavily in air and naval superiority. The protracted nature of the campaign highlighted the importance and complexity of logistical operations in wartime, a realization that would significantly shape subsequent Allied operations in the European theater. One key strategic evolution involved the use of naval and air bombardment to support ground operations. Prior to launching a full-scale ground attack, Allied forces employed extensive aerial bombings and naval gunfire to weaken Axis fortifications. This preparatory phase saw the use of strategic bombers from North Africa, which targeted infrastructure and communication lines, aiming to isolate segments of the Axis defenses. On several occasions, this strategy proved effective, softening enemy positions enough for ground troops to make incremental advances. However, the reliance on aerial bombings also had unintended consequences, including substantial destruction of historical towns and civilian casualties, fostering a complex humanitarian scenario that the Allied commanders had to address amidst the ongoing military operations. The human dimension of the Sicilian campaign was poignant and often tragic. Both Axis and Allied soldiers endured extreme conditions, with high casualty rates exacerbated by the harsh combat conditions and the incessant summer heat, which led to severe dehydration and heat strokes. Furthermore, the civilian population of Sicily bore a tremendous burden. Towns and villages became battlegrounds, leading to widespread displacement and suffering. Stories of local Sicilians aiding stranded or wounded Allied soldiers, even at great personal risk, illustrated the complex relationships and moral dilemmas faced by civilians in wartime. These interactions, although fraught with danger, sometimes built unexpected bridges between the foreign troops and local populace, sowing seeds of trust that would help somewhat in the post-war reconstruction and reconciliation efforts. As the campaign dragged on, it became clear that capturing Sicily was only the precursor to a much larger and more daunting task: the invasion of the Italian mainland, which promised even steeper resistance and greater strategic challenges. The experience in Sicily forced the Allied commanders to rethink their approach to combined arms operations, integration of air and naval firepower, and inter-Allied coordination. The lessons learned in these bloody weeks were meticulously analyzed and incorporated into the operational planning for mainland Italy. Command decisions during this phase were critical in shaping the outcome and subsequent phases of the campaign. General George S. Patton and General Bernard Montgomery, leading the American and British forces respectively, had to constantly adapt their tactics and coordinate efficiently, notwithstanding a notorious rivalry and differing military philosophies. Their leadership was instrumental in maintaining the morale and tactical efficiency of their units under difficult conditions, showcasing a dynamic, if sometimes contentious, model of Allied leadership. The Sicilian campaign, as resolved in mid-August 1943, left behind a landscape scarred by warfare, but also a crucial strategic victory for the Allies. It precipitated the downfall of Mussolini and opened up the Mediterranean sea lanes, easing future Allied operations in the region. It also provided a proving ground where the Allied forces learned and adapted warfare techniques that would be crucial in the forthcoming Italian campaign. These protracted and intense engagements on Sicilian soil underscored several pivotal aspects of World War II. The importance of logistics, the impact of terrain on military operations, the integration of combined arms, and the human cost of warfare were all elements that defined the Sicilian campaign. Each would resonate throughout the remaining years of the global conflict, influencing tactics, strategies, and policies in the broader Allied war effort. The battle for Sicily was not just a military operation, but a complex confluence of strategy, humanity, and geopolitics that offered profound lessons. A veritable fortress of fire, where every hill contested shaped the contours of the ensuing global strategies. In the wake of the Sicilian campaign, the story of the American and British forces was far from over. As they prepared to invade mainland Italy, the challenges escalated exponentially, with every decision underpinned by the urgent need for meticulous planning and coordination. The transition from the Sicilian shores to the rugged terrains of Italy posed a series of complex logistical puzzles and leadership dilemmas, compounded by the harsh realities of an extended supply line, the relentless resistance from Axis forces, and the rugged, unforgiving Italian topography. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, now the supreme Allied commander in the Mediterranean, faced the formidable task of orchestrating this next phase. The objective was clear: expel the Axis from Italy and utilize the country as a staging ground for future operations in Europe. However, the implementation of this objective was anything but straightforward. The Allied forces had to contend with two major issues: the tough, well-prepared German defenses, known as the Gustav Line, stretching across Italy's narrowest point from the Tyrrhenian Sea to the Adriatic, and the unpredictable, often treacherous mountainous terrain, which gave the defending forces a significant advantage. The Gustav Line was a formidable barrier, equipped with concrete bunkers, anti-tank ditches, and dense minefields, all strategically placed to exploit the natural defensive features of the terrain. Here, the lessons learned in Sicily regarding the integration of combined arms were put to the test under even more demanding conditions. The Allies had to synchronize their air, naval, and ground operations meticulously to breach these defenses. This demanded not only technological superiority, but also an unprecedented level of inter-Allied coordination, particularly in the realm of tactical air support, which had proven essential in Sicily. While Eisenhower managed the overall strategic direction, it was up to generals like Patton and Montgomery to implement these strategies on the ground. Their approach to leadership and tactical deployment varied drastically. Patton, known for his aggressive and direct style, pushed for rapid, bold maneuvers intended to disorient and dismantle the enemy's operational capabilities. In contrast, Montgomery advocated for a more methodical, calculated approach, emphasizing sustained artillery bombardments followed by measured infantry advances. These differing philosophies often led to heated debates and required careful management to maintain an effective unified front. On the logistical side, the campaign's success hinged on the ability of the Allies to maintain a steady flow of supplies. Everything from ammunition to medical supplies, food, and fuel had to be transported across challenging terrain under constant threat of Axis interdiction. The logistical teams learned to employ a variety of strategies to mitigate these challenges, such as using local railways, upgrading port facilities for better efficiency, and implementing mobile repair units to maintain vehicle and weapon operability in the field. This logistical network, though constantly targeted by Axis forces, proved crucial in keeping the Allied war machine moving forward. Humanity and morale were also central themes throughout the Italian campaign. The protracted nature of the conflict, marked by brutal combat and significant casualties, weighed heavily on the soldiers' spirits. The psychological toll was compounded by the harsh Italian winter, muddy conditions that bogged down equipment, and the relentless pressure from a well-entrenched enemy. The commanders had to be as much psychologists as tacticians, fostering resilience through leadership, maintaining communication lines with troops, and ensuring adequate rest and rotation schedules. Moreover, the interaction with the Italian civilian population added another layer of complexity to the Allied operations. Following Italy's surrender and the ousting of Mussolini, the Allies found themselves not only fighting the Germans, but also managing a turbulent socio-political landscape within Italy itself. This required careful diplomatic maneuvering to ensure local cooperation, which was vital for intelligence gathering and maintaining security in rear areas. The psychological operations units played a significant role here, broadcasting messages, distributing leaflets, and engaging in other acts of psychological warfare intended to weaken enemy morale and bolster support for Allied operations among the Italian populace. As the campaign dragged on, the cost in human lives continued to mount, and the strategic relevance of Italy as a means to invade the rest of Europe came under scrutiny. The rugged terrain and determined Axis defense turned many operations into deadly stalemates, with each side inflicting and suffering significant casualties. The battle for places like Monte Cassino, Anzio, and the numerous river crossings painted a grim picture of the toll the Italian campaign extracted from both Axis and Allied forces. The strategic bombings, aimed at crippling German logistics and reinforcement capabilities, inadvertently led to considerable civilian casualties, complicating the moral and ethical landscape of the Allied campaign. These bombings, while tactically justifiable as efforts to disrupt German command and control capabilities, raised poignant questions about the war's human cost and the blurry lines between military and civilian targets. Ultimately, the Italian campaign, though slow and costly, played a critical role in diverting German attention and resources from other fronts, notably the Eastern Front and the preparations for the D-Day landings in Normandy. It tested the resolve and capability of the Allied forces on multiple fronts, from tactical ingenuity and logistical innovation to human resilience and moral judgment. The campaign's prolonged nature highlighted the complexities of coalition warfare, where diverse armies with differing doctrines and cultures had to find common ground against a common adversary. In conclusion, as the Allied forces emerged victorious from the Italian campaign, the landscape was forever changed. The sweeping hills and serene villages were transformed into silent witnesses to the sacrifices made in the pursuit of freedom. The campaign not only reshaped the strategic panorama of World War II, but also left indelible marks on the soldiers and civilians who lived through it, encapsulating the profound human and moral dimensions of warfare. These chapters, steeped in tactical brilliance, logistical mastery, and human endurance, underscored the immense complexities of global conflict and the relentless pursuit of peace in the face of overwhelming adversity.